Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we begin with a quiet idea that has shaped battlefields, boardrooms, marriages, markets, locker rooms, family dinners, and even the silent choreography of strangers merging onto a highway. It is called game theory. And before we settle in, if you enjoy these calm journeys through ideas, please follow SleepWise and share this episode with someone who might like to fall asleep while learning something new. Because game theory may sound like something sealed inside a textbook, but in truth, it lives much closer than that. It lives in the pause before an apology, in the tension of a negotiation, in the split second before a penalty kick, in the guarded language of rival nations measuring the cost of the next move. It lives in marriage, where one person chooses whether to soften first after an argument, never quite certain whether tenderness will be returned or taken for granted. It lives in parenting, where a child asks for one more exception, and a parent senses that tonight's small decision may become tomorrow's habit. It lives in business, where two firms cut prices to win customers, only to discover that both may end up poorer for trying. And it lives in war, where leaders do not simply ask what they want to do, but what the other side might do in response. That is the heart of game theory. Not games in the ordinary sense, but strategic interaction. The deeply human fact that our choices are shaped by the choices of others, and that the future often depends on what each side believes the other side is willing to risk, protect, surrender, or endure. What will they do if I do this? What do they think I will do? What happens if I trust? What happens if I wait? What happens if we both reach for the same advantage at once? These questions travel quietly through life. They shape cooperation and conflict, loyalty and betrayal, fairness and revenge. They help explain why rational people sometimes create terrible outcomes, why mistrust can trap two sides that would both prefer peace, and why kindness, under the right conditions, can be not only moral, but strategic. So tonight, we will move slowly through this hidden architecture of human behavior, through war and deterrence, through business rivalry and negotiation, through sports, bluffing, and timing, through marriage, parenting, friendship, and the repeated little bargains that make up ordinary life. There will be no need to hold everything tightly in your mind. We will simply let the examples guide us, one by one, until the pattern begins to appear for itself. Quiet, elegant, and strangely familiar. So, let the day loosen its grip. Let the noise of the world recede. There is nothing to solve tonight, only something to notice. Some of the most important choices in your life were never yours alone. The first step into game theory is simpler than it sounds. It begins with an observation that the outcome of your decision may depend not only on you, but on someone else too. If you plant a garden, the tomatoes will not negotiate with you. If you boil water, it will not try to outguess your intentions. Nature may be complex, but it is not strategic in this particular way. People are different. People watch, infer, anticipate, conceal, cooperate, and compete. The moment two thinking minds begin adjusting to one another, a kind of invisible game appears. This is why game theory is not really about games at all. It is about strategic interaction, situations in which each person's best move depends on the likely moves of others. Imagine two shopkeepers on the same street. One lowers prices, hoping to attract more customers. The other now faces a choice: keep prices steady and risk losing business, or lower prices too and protect market share, even if profits shrink for both. Neither shopkeeper is choosing alone. Each is choosing inside a web of reaction. Or picture two siblings deciding whether to clean the kitchen after dinner. If both help, the work is light. If one helps while the other disappears, resentment begins to bloom. If both avoid the task, the kitchen remains a mess and the mood of the evening sours. Again, the decision is not just about effort. It is about expectation, fairness, memory, and what each thinks the other will do. A game, in the language of game theory, has players, choices, and outcomes. The players may be generals, parents, companies, teammates, or strangers at an intersection. The choices may be dramatic or small: attack or wait, cooperate or defect, speak or stay silent, share or hoard, apologize now or hold your ground. And the outcomes are shaped together. That last part matters most. Many ideas in life concern what is best for you alone. Game theory asks something more delicate. What is best for you, given that someone else is thinking too? Given that they have goals, fears, habits, and incentives of their own? Given that they are trying, in their way, to read the situation just as you are? Ordinary life is full of this tension. A colleague decides whether to give credit or keep it. A friend decides whether to call when times are hard. A spouse decides whether to soften first after an argument. A child decides whether a rule is real or merely a suggestion. Every one of these moments contains strategy, even if nobody would ever use that word aloud. Game theory is not really the study of winning. It is the study of interdependence. It asks what happens when lives overlap, when interests collide or align, and when one person's move becomes part of the landscape another person must navigate. Once you see that, the subject begins to feel less like mathematics and more like a mirror held up to human life. And that mirror is everywhere. A famous game theory idea begins in uncertainty. Two suspects are taken into separate rooms. They cannot speak to one another, stay silent, and if the other stays silent too, both receive a lighter punishment. Betray the other while the other stays silent, and you go free while they pay the price. But if both betray, both suffer more than they would have if each had simply remained quiet. This is the prisoner's dilemma. Its power comes from how elegant it is. Each prisoner, reasoning alone, can see why betrayal may seem safer. If the other stays silent, betrayal brings the best personal outcome. If the other betrays, then betrayal at least protects you from being the only one left exposed In both directions, self-protection points the same way. And yet, when both follow that logic, both may end up worse off. This is one of the first lessons of game theory, that individually rational choices can create a collectively inferior result. Two people, each making sense from their own vantage point, can quietly build a worse result together. Once you notice this, the dilemma appears far beyond prison walls. Two rival firms may each cut prices, fearing that calm will look like weakness. So both discount, both earn less, and neither arrives where it hoped to be. Two athletes may each consider banned substances. If neither does, the contest remains fair. If one does, while the other refrains, the dishonest one may gain an edge. And so both may feel pressure to enter a race neither wanted to run. Two neighboring countries may each build weapons. Each calls the buildup defensive. Each fears vulnerability more than waste. And yet, as both arm themselves, suspicion deepens and security feels less secure. Even in daily life, the same pattern returns. Two commuters speed to save a minute, and roads grow more dangerous for everyone. Two co-workers hoard information to protect their standing, and the team grows weaker. Two spouses keep score rather than extend grace, and a relationship begins to feel less like shelter and more like accounting. The prisoner's dilemma is common. It captures the pain of mistrust. It shows how fear of being the only one to cooperate can push people toward caution, even when cooperation would leave both better off. It explains why suspicion can spread so quickly, and why mutual guardedness can become its own kind of trap. But the story is not entirely bleak. The dilemma describes what can happen when people meet once, without trust, memory, or a future together. Real life is often more layered. People meet again. They remember. They reward loyalty and punish betrayal. They build reputations. They repair. That can change the logic of the game. Still, the lesson remains important. Sometimes the hardest part of human life is not choosing between good and evil. It is choosing between trust and self-protection when you cannot be sure what the other side will do. Most of life is not a one-time encounter. It is a repeated game. You speak to the same partner again tomorrow. You work with the same colleagues, return to the same friendships, and carry forward the memory of how yesterday felt. Choices are no longer isolated. They echo. This changes everything. In a one-time interaction, selfishness can seem tempting. Take the advantage now. Protect yourself first. But in repeated life, today's gain can become tomorrow's damage. A sharp word returns as distance. A small betrayal returns as caution. Generosity returns as warmth. Reliability returns as trust. Marriage and friendship are rich examples of game theory. A marriage is not built from one grand gesture. It is built from thousands of small moves. Who listens when the other is tired? Who softens after conflict? Who keeps promises that seem small? Who notices effort? Who chooses again and again, not merely to win the moment, but to protect the pattern? Over time, couples learn each other's strategies, though they would rarely call them that. An apology may be sincere or merely convenient. Silence may mean peace or retreat. Kindness may be answered with kindness or taken for granted. The relationship becomes a memory of repeated choices. Friendship works much the same way. A friend who only appears in easy seasons is playing one kind of game. A friend who remembers, checks in, forgives, and shows up when life is inconvenient is playing another. Loyalty becomes meaningful because it is tested across time. So does honesty. So does patience. Small rituals matter more than they seem. Returning a call, keeping confidence, arriving when you said you would. These acts become signals. They tell the other person what future they can expect. And expectation is the soil in which trust grows. This is also why retaliation can be so dangerous in close relationships. If every slight is answered with a new slight, the pattern hardens. One cold evening becomes a colder week. One sarcastic comment becomes a household language. Before long, both people may feel trapped in a game neither remembers choosing. Repeated games also make grace possible. Because the future matters, a relationship can survive a hard moment. Forgiveness can interrupt the cycle. A generous move can reset the board. A spouse can choose kindness before it is earned. A friend can interpret clumsy behavior with mercy instead of suspicion. Game theory helps explain why stable love often feels less dramatic than people imagine. It is not triumph or surrender, but endurance. It is not constant victory, but coordination. It is two people slowly teaching each other that cooperation is safe, that honesty will not always be punished, and that short-term advantage is rarely worth long-term corrosion. In that sense, trust is not just feeling. It is a pattern. And like most patterns in human life, it is built move by move. If marriage and friendship are repeated games among equals, parenting is different. It is still full of strategy, but the players do not begin with the same power, information, or understanding of consequences. A child is learning the rules while testing whether the rules are real. A parent is trying to teach, protect, and guide while knowing that every response may shape what happens next. This makes family life one of clearest places to see incentives at work. A small child asks for one more story, one more snack, one more exception. It looks simple, but beneath it lies negotiation. If the answer changes each night, the child learns that persistence may be rewarded. If the parent gives in only after tears, then tears themselves may become part of the strategy. Not because the child is calculating like a little economist, but because human beings learn from patterns long before they can name them. Children notice consistency. They notice when one parent is stricter than the other. They notice when rules apply in public but disappear in private. They notice whether consequences arrive immediately, unpredictably, or not at all. From those observations, they form expectations. In that sense, a household is always teaching. It teaches whether promises mean something. It teaches whether boundaries hold. It teaches whether honesty is safer than concealment. It teaches whether shouting works better than asking. This is why so much parenting advice returns to consistency. Repeated interactions create a behavioral world. A child is not responding only to tonight's instruction. The child is responding to the remembered pattern of many nights before. Siblings reveal another side of game theory. They cooperate, compete, imitate, bargain, provoke, and form temporary alliances with astonishing speed. One child may share generously until a favorite toy appears. Another may refuse a task until a sibling is praised for helping. Rivalry often intensifies not because children want conflict for its own sake, but because attention, fairness, and status can feel scarce inside a family. Parents, too, are drawn into the game. Praise one child carelessly, and another may hear comparison. Solve every dispute instantly, and children may learn to outsource all peacekeeping upward. Ignore every dispute, and they may learn that power belongs to whoever shouts longest. Warmth works best when it is paired with clarity. Children thrive when kindness and predictability live together. Love is not weakened by structure. Often, it is made more legible through it. Over time, a child raised in a stable pattern begins to internalize the game. The external rule becomes an inner habit. Waiting becomes easier. Sharing becomes more natural. Honesty becomes less risky. That is one of quiet hopes of parenting. Not to win every moment, but to shape the future pattern. That may be one of most human games of all. By the time we step outside the home, the game grows larger. It no longer belongs only to couples, siblings, or parents, but to strangers who will never learn each other's names. And yet, even among strangers, the same quiet logic remains. Choices shaped by expectations and the possibility that someone else may seize an advantage first. Traffic is one of the clearest examples. A road looks like a line of independent drivers, each alone with a destination. But every lane is really a shared system of prediction. You accelerate because you expect the car ahead to continue. You brake because you fear the car beside you may drift. You signal because you hope the signal will shape another person's response. Even merging is a small negotiation. One driver eases back, another moves forward, a third tries to force a narrow opening. No words are exchanged, yet courtesy, patience, boldness, and self-interest meet in a few silent seconds. If enough people cooperate, the flow feels smooth. If too many chase their own tiny advantage, the road tightens into friction. Game theory explains why. When everyone values personal speed above collective ease, each driver may feel tempted to cut ahead or block others. But when many do this at once, the system slows for everyone. The individual gain is brief. The shared cost is broad. This pattern appears in cues as well. Stand in line at an airport or coffee shop, and an invisible agreement forms. We wait our turn because we expect others to do the same. The moment one person slips forward, the agreement weakens. Others begin to wonder whether restraint is foolish. A public norm is like that. It survives only while enough people believe cooperation will be matched by cooperation. If too many suspect that courtesy is for losers, selfishness begins to spread. Not because everyone is cruel, but because no one wants to be the only person still playing by the old rules. You can see the same logic in littering and shared spaces. A clean park stays clean partly because people notice that others have respected it. A dirty sidewalk invites one more wrapper, one more small surrender. People copy the visible behavior of a group because the group suggests what kind of game is being played. This is also why public trust matters so much. When a city feels orderly, drivers are more likely to yield, pedestrians more likely to wait, neighbors more likely to care for common space. When trust erodes, every interaction becomes slightly more defensive. And yet, cooperation in public life is never guaranteed. It must be renewed through ordinary acts, letting someone merge, returning a shopping cart, respecting the queue, keeping a place clean you do not personally own. These gestures are small, but together they make a society feel livable. A road, a line, a sidewalk, a waiting room. Each becomes a quiet test of whether people will treat shared life as something to exploit or preserve. Sport often looks like pure motion. A runner breaks from the pack, a goalkeeper dives, a tennis player serves wide, a quarterback waits 1 second longer than expected before releasing the ball. But beneath the visible movement lies something less obvious and often more important: strategic anticipation. In sport, as in life, success is rarely about action alone. It is about choosing an action while thinking about what the other side expects you to choose. A penalty kick is one of the clearest examples. The shooter must decide where to place the ball. The goalkeeper must decide where to leap. Each knows the other is guessing too. If the kicker always aims to the same side, the pattern becomes readable. If the goalkeeper jumps too early, the shot can be adjusted. Both are trapped inside a tiny game of prediction. This is why athletes work so hard to become unreadable. A tennis player disguises a serve until the final instant. A basketball player uses the eyes to suggest one pass and deliver another. A boxer feints with the shoulder, inviting a defensive move that opens a new angle. Even in sports built on strength and speed, deception often belongs to the highest level of play. The point is not dishonesty in a moral sense. It is strategic concealment. If your opponent can easily predict you, then your options narrow before you have even moved. To compete well, you must sometimes reveal less than you know, and sometimes show something you do not intend to do. American football is rich with this logic. Teams script formations to influence how the defense lines up. A play-action fake works because defenders must respect the possibility of a run. In soccer, a team may press high to force hurried decisions. In cycling, riders conserve energy in the pack, waiting for the moment when others are least prepared for an attack. Even pacing can be strategic. A marathon is not always won by the strongest body alone, but by the athlete who best understands when rivals will tire. The same is true in chess, where patience can be a weapon, and in poker, where stillness itself can be part of the game. Yet, sport teaches something else as well. If deception matters, so does credibility. A fake works only because a real threat exists behind it. A striker can sell the shot because defenders know the shot is dangerous. A quarterback can bluff a throw because the arm is respected. In game theory, this is called signaling. Teams also live inside repeated games. Rivalries develop memories. Coaches learn tendencies. Players study footage to search for habits. What someone does when nervous, what they prefer under pressure, how they behave when protecting a lead. This is one reason sport can feel so absorbing. In a few seconds, fear, confidence, disguise, timing, trust, and reputation all collide. And often the result belongs not to the strongest move, but to the move the other side failed to foresee. Business is often described as a world of numbers. Revenue, margins, market share, pricing, growth. Yet beneath the spreadsheets lies an atmosphere not so different from diplomacy or sport. Firms watch one another, interpret one another's moves, and make choices in the shadow of expected reactions. A company rarely asks only, "What should we do?" It also asks, "What will our competitors do if we do it first?" Imagine two airlines serving the same route. One lowers fares to attract more passengers. The other must decide whether to hold firm and protect pricing or match the cut and defend its share. If both slash prices, planes may fill while profits thin. If neither cuts, both may earn more. But neither wants to be the one that stays expensive, while the other becomes irresistible. This is the prisoner's dilemma dressed in corporate clothing. Each firm may understand that a stable market would serve them both better. Yet fear of losing the ground can drive each toward the same defensive move until the industry becomes harsher for everyone. In business, as in life, short-term self-protection can quietly poison long-term health. Price wars are only one example. A technology company launches features partly because customers want them, and partly because rivals might announce something similar next quarter. A retailer extends discounts because competitors may do the same. A startup rushes into a market not because timing is perfect, but because waiting feels dangerous. Even investment can be strategic. A firm may build excess capacity, sign a long contract, or spend heavily on branding not only for immediate profit, but to send a message: we are serious, we are durable. This is where game theory becomes especially useful. It reminds us that business decisions are rarely isolated calculations. They are choices made in an ecosystem of observers. Suppliers react, customers compare, regulators watch, competitors infer. What looks like a pricing decision may also be a signal of strength, fear, ambition, or desperation. Sometimes cooperation enters the picture too. companies may settle into patterns. One leads in premium offerings, another in low-cost scale. Without direct coordination, industries often drift toward uneasy equilibrium, each player recognizing the damage of endless retaliation. Still, the balance is fragile. A new entrant arrives with different incentives. A recession squeezes margins. A proud chief executive decides to win at any cost, and suddenly the old pattern breaks. Marketing intensifies. Discounts deepen. Hiring grows more aggressive. Customers cheer while investors grow tense. Railroads, telecoms, airlines, ride-sharing platforms, streaming services, again and again, companies discover that competitive logic can reward moves that are individually understandable but collectively ruinous. A good business does not merely act. It understands the game it is in and which games not to start. Negotiation is one of the most human forms of strategy. It can happen in a boardroom over billions, at a kitchen table over weekend plans, in a labor dispute, a peace process, a salary discussion, or a quiet conversation between two people deciding where to live. The scale changes. The structure does not. At the center of negotiation lies a simple truth. What you can obtain depends not only on what you want, but on what the other side believes, needs, fears, and can refuse. Bargaining is not just about speaking well. It is about leverage, patience, information, and the ability to live with no deal at all. Consider a salary negotiation. An employee may know the role is valuable and the market pays more elsewhere, but the outcome depends on more than merit. Does the company think the employee can leave? Does the employee think the company can easily replace them? Are there alternatives on either side? Every offer rests on a hidden landscape of outside options. The same is true when buying a house or a car. A seller asks high, partly because room must exist to move downward. A buyer hesitates partly to test whether urgency is real. Silence becomes information. Delay becomes pressure. A quick concession can be interpreted as flexibility or weakness. Diplomacy turns these patterns into history. Countries negotiate ceasefires, trade terms, alliances, prisoner exchanges, and borders not only with documents, but with signals about resolve. A nation may reject an offer not because the offer is terrible, but because acceptance would reveal vulnerability. Another may accept less than it wanted because prolonging the dispute would cost too much. This is why patience is powerful. The side that appears least desperate often gains room, but patience has to be believable. If waiting obviously harms you more than the other side, then delay loses force. Game theory calls this commitment and credibility. Many negotiations are not purely adversarial. In a healthy marriage, two people bargain all the time without ever calling it that. Whose family to visit for the holidays, how to divide chores, when to save and when to spend. A good negotiation, there is not one where a winner crushes a loser. It is one where the future relationship remains stronger after the bargain than before it. That matters more than people think. In one-time negotiations, extracting every possible advantage can seem rational. In repeated life, it can be costly. Win too hard today, and tomorrow arrives with resentment. Press every edge in business, and a supplier becomes less cooperative next quarter. The deepest negotiators understand this. They read not only the terms, but the afterlife of the terms. They know that preserving dignity can create value, that allowing the other side something to defend can speed agreement, and that fairness can be strategically wise. Long before people speak plainly, they send signals. A watch on the wrist, a title on a business card, the calm tone of someone who wishes to look unhurried, the studied silence before replying to a message, the promise made publicly, the threat delivered softly. All of these can function as signals in the games of life. A signal is a message carried through behavior. Sometimes it is intentional, sometimes it is not. But either way, others read it and adjust. That is why signaling matters so deeply in game theory. Much of human strategy is not about changing reality directly, but about shaping what others believe reality to be. Animals do this too. A bird spreads its feathers. A deer raises its head. A cat arches its back. In nature, displays of strength and readiness can reduce the need for constant combat. If the signal is clear enough, one side may retreat before violence begins. In business, a company may rent prestigious offices, hire famous advisors, or announce ambitious plans to suggest permanence and strength. In politics, leaders use ceremony and posture to project resolve. In social life, people signal status, confidence, humility, wealth, or independence through choices that seem personal but are often partly strategic. The difficulty is that signals can be faked. Anyone can speak confidently for a few minutes. Anyone can borrow appearances. Anyone can make a threat. For a signal to matter, it must feel credible. One reason wedding rings, uniforms, degrees, luxury goods, and public commitments can carry weight is that they are costly in one way or another. This is a subtle but powerful idea. Sometimes the value of an action lies less in what it achieves immediately than in what it communicates. A company that refuses to cut corners may spend more in the short run, but build a reputation for quality. A parent who calmly enforces a boundary sends a signal that future rules are real. A friend who appears exactly when promised sends information far beyond the hour itself. Reputation grows from repeated signals. A person known for honesty does not need to persuade as aggressively. A company known for reliability can charge differently. A nation known to respond firmly may deter challenges without firing a shot. Past behavior becomes a shorthand the world carries forward. This is also why reputation can be so fragile. It takes time to build and little time to damage. One public betrayal, one empty threat, one broken promise in the wrong moment, and the game changes. Others update what they believe. Yet signaling is not always manipulative. Often it is how trust is formed in the first place. We cannot see inside one another. We must infer. So we watch patterns. We notice whether words match deeds, whether confidence survives pressure, whether kindness continues when it is inconvenient. War is often remembered as noise, engines, smoke, maps, alarms, exhausted men leaning over tables beneath artificial light. But beneath the noise there is something quieter and more unsettling: calculation. In war, almost no move is judged by its intention alone. A division near the border may be described as defensive by one side and seen as preparation for attack by the other. That is why military strategy is so deeply connected to game theory. A commander is never asking only, "What should we do?" but also, "What will they do if we do it?" Advance, and the enemy may retreat, reinforce, or lure you forward. Wait, and patience may be read as prudence or weakness. Even silence becomes meaningful. A delayed response, a public speech, a naval exercise, a missile test, each can shift expectations before a shot is fired. This is the logic of deterrence. You do not prevent aggression simply by wishing for peace. You try to make aggression look too costly to attempt. Walls once served that purpose. So did mounted cavalry at a frontier, fleets at sea, forts on high ground, alliances, air bases, and later missile systems. Military power is not only force, it is also communication. It tells rivals what price may follow a certain move. It signals readiness, resolve, and the possibility of retaliation. But deterrence is delicate. If a threat sounds empty, it may invite challenge. If it sounds too absolute, it may create panic. And when leaders believe war is coming anyway, they may begin to wonder whether striking first is safer than waiting to be struck. This is one reason arms races are so dangerous. Each side often says it is only protecting itself, while the other side feels the circle tightening. One army buys artillery because the neighbor bought artillery. The neighbor expands air defense because aircraft numbers rose across the border. Soon, both feel less safe, not more. Fear, acting rationally from both directions, can build its own machinery. History offers many versions of this pattern. Ancient city-states strengthened walls not because they desired battle, but because visible strength could discourage siege. Empires moved troops to contested land, hoping display itself might settle the matter. Naval powers patrolled trade routes to send a message long before cannon fire became necessary. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes a signal meant to preserve peace was read as the first move of war. That is the tragedy. In strategic life, danger does not always come from hatred alone. It often comes from misreading, from seeing preparation as intention, caution as weakness, delay as deceit. Game theory cannot make war humane, and it cannot erase grief. But it can explain why so much of war begins before battle, in the invisible realm of signals, expectations, fear, and the pressure of trying to shape another side's choices without fully knowing how that side sees you. No modern rivalry made this logic clearer than the Cold War. For decades, the United States and the Soviet Union remained locked in a contest that was neither open war nor genuine peace, a long suspension shaped by ideology, fear, secrecy, and nuclear power. At the heart of it lay a brutal insight. If either side launched a full nuclear strike, the other would still retain enough weapons to answer with catastrophic force. A first attack would not guarantee safety. It would guarantee devastation on both sides. This was mutually assured destruction. The phrase sounds cold because it was cold. Its message was simple. Once such a war begins, there is no meaningful winner. In game theory terms, the weapons existed not only to fight, but to make fighting look irrational before it started. This created a strange stability. The world felt unsafe, yet that very danger imposed restraint. Missile silos, submarines, bombers, and second strike capability all existed partly to make retaliation believable. If retaliation were not credible, temptation might grow. If one side believed the other could be disarmed in a surprise blow, the equilibrium could fracture. So both sides kept building forces they hoped never to use. That was the paradox. Vast arsenals were accumulated in order to prevent the moment when arsenals would matter most. Diplomats negotiated limits, while generals planned for escalation. Public hostility existed beside private channels of communication. Each side tested boundaries, but both watched for signs that pressure was becoming panic. The fear of losing control became part of the system that preserved control. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed how fragile that balance could be. In October 1962, Soviet missiles in Cuba and American naval pressure brought the world frighteningly close to the edge. Those 13 days were not only about missiles, they were about signaling, credibility, delay, and the danger of leaving an opponent with no path backward. The crisis eased not because one side crushed the other, but because both sides stepped carefully enough to avoid cornering the other completely. Public firmness was paired with private compromise. That detail matters. When an adversary has no dignified exit, the risk of reckless action rises. Sometimes peace depends on allowing the other side to retreat without humiliation. Survival may depend not only on strength, but on restraint shaped with precision. The Cold War also depended on human judgment. False alarms occurred. Machines misread data. Officers received warnings that might have been the beginning of the end. At several moments, catastrophe was avoided because someone paused, doubted, or refused to respond too quickly. In the most dangerous game ever played, caution itself became a strategic virtue. That may be the deepest lesson of the age. Some games can only be survived, never truly won. But conflict is rarely a contest between only two fixed opponents. Most of the time, the game grows larger. Nations gather allies, companies form partnerships, political factions build coalitions, and even families divide into circles of loyalty. An alliance is a promise with consequences beyond itself. It says, if pressure comes to you, I may not remain a spectator. That possibility changes the calculations of everyone watching. An alliance can preserve peace by raising the cost of aggression. But it can also widen danger, because once many actors are tied together, a local dispute may begin pulling in distant powers. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand did not remain a local crisis for long. Treaties, mobilization timetables, rivalries, and mutual commitments helped turn a regional shock into a continental war. Networks meant to provide security also created momentum. That is one uneasy truth of coalition life. Alliances protect by promising support, yet they also create dependence. A smaller partner may act more boldly because it trusts larger friends to stand behind it. A larger partner may fear being dragged into confrontation by someone else's gamble. The same logic appears in business. Two firms may partner to enter a market, share technology, or lower costs. At first, the alliance looks efficient, but incentives can drift. One side wants rapid expansion. The other wants discipline. One wants control, while the other wants flexibility. The partnership survives only while both believe cooperation serves them better than exit or betrayal. Even friendships carry this pattern. A conflict between two people can quietly become a test for the whole group. Who will defend whom? Who will stay neutral? Who will be accused of disloyalty for telling the truth? Once loyalties overlap, individual choices stop feeling entirely individual. Betrayal matters because it changes future expectations. A nation that abandons a partner, a company that breaks a venture carelessly, a friend who disappears in a crucial hour. Each teaches observers that promises may be less reliable than they seemed. Trust shrinks, hedging grows, and yet alliances remain essential. Few people, firms, or nations thrive through isolation. The question is not whether to form bonds, but how to build bonds that can survive strain. Durable alliances require aligned incentives, believable commitments, and enough shared benefit that one difficult season does not immediately become a breakup. They also require room for adjustment. No coalition can remain healthy if every disagreement is treated as treason. Game theory helps explain why strong alliances feel both sturdy and fragile at once. They are sturdy because coordinated support can deter danger and create advantage. They are fragile because each member is always asking whether cooperation still serves the future better than walking away. For all the suspicion and rivalry that game theory reveals, one of its gentlest lessons is that cooperation is often not naive. Under the right conditions, cooperation can be the most intelligent strategy available. If two people meet only once, selfishness may seem tempting. Take the gain now, avoid being the fool, and leave the cost behind. But most of life is not arranged that way. We return to the same homes, offices, neighborhoods, markets, and sometimes the same rivals. The future keeps arriving, carrying memory with it. That memory changes what self-interest looks like. If I know I will meet you again, cheating you today may damage tomorrow. If a business deceives customers once, reputation may erode for years. If a country breaks every agreement, future diplomacy grows thinner. If a spouse keeps seeking tiny victories, the relationship may grow colder with every small win. Repeated games reward patterns that are clear, firm, and cooperative. A famous example is a simple strategy often called tit for tat. Begin cooperatively, then respond in kind. Answer kindness with kindness. Answer betrayal with resistance. But if the other side returns to cooperation, return as well. Its power lies in balance. It is not weak because it does not absorb endless abuse. It is not harsh because it does not punish forever once the other side improves. It creates a world in which cooperation is welcomed, exploitation is discouraged, and repair remains possible. That is why fairness matters. People accept sacrifice more readily when they believe others are sacrificing. Workers endure hard periods more willingly when leaders share burdens visibly. Citizens follow rules more readily when they believe those rules are not for fools alone. The willingness to cooperate depends on whether cooperation appears mutual. Nature offers examples too. Animals groom one another, share warning calls, and form reciprocal relationships because repeated interaction can make helping behavior adaptive. Human beings with language, memory, and moral imagination carry this logic further. Markets depend on it. Families depend on it. Civilization depends on it. Contracts, customs, routines, and reputations all help make cooperation safer than it would otherwise be. Still, cooperation is never automatic. People must believe the future matters. They must believe bad behavior will have consequences. They must believe good behavior will not simply be harvested and mocked. Where those conditions collapse, cooperation often collapses with them. Yet when they hold, individuals pursuing their own interests can build systems of trust, reliability, and mutual gain. That may be one of the hopeful ideas in game theory. It suggests that decency and prudence are not always opposites. Sometimes the kindest path is also the smartest one, especially when the game is long enough to remember who we have been to one another. But cooperation does not preserve itself through kindness alone. Every family, school, market, and society eventually meets a question. What should happen when someone takes the benefit of trust and refuses to carry the cost? This is where punishment enters the story. Punishment has an uncomfortable reputation. It can become cruel, impulsive, excessive, or self-righteous. Yet in game theory, some form of consequence plays a stabilizing role. If there is never any cost to cheating, then cheating becomes more attractive. If promises can be broken without consequence, trust begins to thin. You can see this in childhood. If one sibling always grabs the larger share and nothing follows, the lesson spreads. If a classroom rule exists only in theory, students quickly learn that the real game rewards testing boundaries more than honesty. A mild, predictable consequence is not about vengeance. It is about protecting the pattern that allows cooperation to survive. Adults live inside the same logic. A company that ignores fraud invites more fraud. A sports league that overlooks doping invites more doping. A nation that never answers incursions may invite larger incursions. In each case, the response is meant not only for the wrongdoer, but for every observer deciding what kind of world this is. And yet, punishment has limits. If every mistake is met with overwhelming force, fear begins to replace trust. People become defensive and secretive. A marriage cannot thrive if every error becomes a trial. A workplace cannot function if every misstep becomes humiliation. This is why the deepest systems pair punishment with proportionality. The response must be enough to matter, but not so severe that the relationship becomes impossible to repair. In repeated games, the goal is not merely to retaliate. It is to preserve conditions under which better behavior can return. That is where forgiveness becomes strategically important. Forgiveness is often mistaken for softness, but it can be one of the most disciplined choices available. To forgive is not to pretend nothing happened. It is to decide that the future need not be chained forever to a single failure. In game theory terms, forgiveness allows cooperation to restart after disruption. Without it, relationships would harden under accumulated injuries. Parenting needs it. Friendship needs it. Diplomacy needs it. Even rivals may need it, because endless revenge creates games with no exit. A punishment that never ends stops teaching and starts consuming. The resilient human systems understand this rhythm. They defend boundaries. They discourage exploitation, but they also leave room for return, for apology, and for trust rebuilt through action. Without consequences, cooperation dissolves. Without forgiveness, it cannot heal. Stable life depends on knowing not only when to resist and when to respond, but when to allow the board to begin again. Shared resources create some of the strangest games in human life. A pasture, a fishery, a water supply, a public budget, a clean sidewalk, a quiet office kitchen, even the shared patience inside a household. These are all things many people benefit from, but no single person fully controls. And because no one fully controls them, each person faces a temptation. Take a little more. Contribute a little less. Assume someone else will be careful. This is the tragedy of the commons. Imagine a field open to many herders. If each adds one more animal, the gain belongs mostly to that herder, while the damage to the field is spread across everyone. One extra animal seems small. Then another appears, and another. Soon the grass thins, the soil weakens, and a resource that served all begins to fail. The logic returns in modern forms. Fishermen know that if too many boats chase the same stock, the sea can be emptied faster than it can renew itself. Cities know that roads become choked when every trip makes sense in isolation, but overwhelms the system in aggregate. Families know the feeling when everyone leaves one more dish in the sink, trusting that the future will somehow absorb it. None of this requires wickedness. That is what makes the pattern so unsettling. The tragedy of the commons can emerge from ordinary behavior. Each person reasons, my extra use is small, my shortcut is minor. My neglect will not be the thing that breaks the whole. But when many people make the same calculation, the whole bends under the weight of countless small permissions. The atmosphere works this way, so do groundwater, forests, and sometimes attention itself. A team can suffer when every member assumes someone else will handle the difficult task. A marriage can strain when both partners feel too tired to be the first one to restore warmth. Game theory helps explain why shared resources are hard to protect. The benefit of restraint is dispersed. The cost of restraint is personal and immediate. I sacrifice now, while the reward is uncertain and partly enjoyed by others. So, societies try to change the game. Rules, quotas, fines, norms, and rituals of care all attempt to make preservation feel less lonely and exploitation less attractive. At their best, these systems help people trust that restraint will not be carried by the conscientious few alone. That may be the deepest need in any commons. People are more willing to protect what is shared when they believe others are protecting it too. The sight of mutual care can be as powerful as a law. And when that belief disappears, deterioration often accelerates. The Commons asks a difficult question. Can human beings act as guardians of something they do not own outright, something whose value depends on many invisible acts of restraint? Sometimes we fail, yet much of civilization depends on answering yes, not once, but repeatedly, and often in small ways. Not every bad outcome comes from selfishness. Sometimes people want the same thing and still fail to reach it. They are not enemies. They are simply out of sync. This is another part of game theory, and it is gentler than the prisoner's dilemma. It is the problem of coordination. Imagine two people trying to meet in a crowded city without a fixed plan. Both want the same result. Neither is trying to outwit the other, but each must guess where the other will go. The station, the old cafe, the park bench, the entrance under the clock. Many parts of life work this way. Drivers stay on one side of the road because the value lies not in left or right itself, but in everyone choosing the same side. Language works through coordination too. Money functions because enough people believe others will accept it. Standards and rituals help strangers align expectations. Sport offers vivid examples. A team may be full of talent and still look disjointed if players make different assumptions about timing and space. One midfielder expects the run toward the near post, while the striker bends away. The pass is elegant, the movement intelligent, and yet the chance disappears because the pattern was not shared. Families live inside coordination problems constantly. What time is dinner? Who handles mornings? What counts as tidiness? Which holidays belong to which side of the family? These arrangements feel natural only after they have been repeated to become expectation. Before that, even loving people can frustrate one another simply because they are following different invisible maps. Coordination can also fail on a larger scale. A company may know it needs change, but no department wants to move first. A town may need to evacuate before a storm, yet many residents hesitate because they are waiting to see whether others think the warning is real. Financial panics can begin this way too. This is why focal points matter. Human beings search for clues that make coordination easier. A landmark, a default rule, an industry standard, a common phrase, a ritual repeated enough to become normal. These signals reduce uncertainty by giving many minds the same point of reference. We stop noticing how many silent agreements hold daily life together. Which line forms first? Who speaks after a toast? When applause ends? Where guests place their shoes? A society can feel smooth, not because everyone is virtuous, but because enough people have learned the same rhythms. And when those rhythms fracture, confusion spreads quickly. The problem is not always conflict. Sometimes it is simply the absence of a common pattern. Game theory reminds us that human order depends not only on incentives and punishment, but on shared expectations. To live together well, people must do more than want peace or efficiency. They must know how to meet one another there. Classical game theory often begins with a tidy creature sometimes called the rational actor. This imagined person compares options, weighs payoffs, and chooses the path most likely to serve a clear objective. But real human beings are softer, stranger, and more inconsistent than that. We do not enter life as calculating machines. We are moved by pride, guilt, loyalty, panic, habit, love, embarrassment, envy, fatigue, hope, and the half-lit feeling of memory. We overestimate some dangers and ignore others. We cling to sunk costs. We punish unfairness even when it harms us to do so. Behavioral game theory begins here with the observation that people do not merely optimize. They interpret. They react emotionally. They care about meaning, fairness, and identity, not just outcome. Consider the ultimatum game. One person is given money and told to divide it with another. If the second person accepts the split, both receive the proposed shares. If the second person rejects it, both get nothing. Yet people regularly reject unfair offers. They would rather lose than ratify humiliation. This tells us that human beings value dignity alongside material gain. Fairness is not decoration. It changes behavior. The same is true in families and workplaces. An employee may accept a difficult decision if the process felt respectful, but resist bitterly if the same outcome arrived through contempt. A child may tolerate a rule more calmly when it appears consistent, but rebel when it feels arbitrary. A spouse may forgive a mistake more readily than a pattern of indifference. Social comparison matters too. People judge outcomes not only by what they receive, but by what others receive beside them. A bonus can feel generous until someone else receives much more. A burden can feel bearable until one person seems exempt. Relative position alters the game. So does identity. Nations endure costs to protect honor. Fans remain loyal through losing seasons. Families keep promises because they are part of who they believe themselves to be. Human beings often choose in ways that preserve self-respect, belonging, or moral coherence, even when a narrow accountant would call the choice irrational. And then there is limited attention. People are tired, distracted, busy, working from fragments of information. In real life, strategy unfolds under uncertainty and limited mental bandwidth. That is why habits matter. That is why rules of thumb matter. Behavioral game theory does not destroy the logic of strategy. It humanizes it. It says that the games of life are played not by cold abstractions, but by creatures with nervous systems, histories, loyalties, and bruised egos. To understand human choice, we must understand not only incentives, but also shame, pride, fairness, anger, and the need to feel seen. This makes the world less tidy. It also makes it more real. By this point, game theory may seem to belong everywhere. War rooms, boardrooms, locker rooms, family kitchens, classrooms, and city streets. And perhaps that is the quiet surprise of it. The hidden games of life are rarely announced. They are woven into ordinary moments so familiar that we barely notice them. A text arrives, and you decide whether to answer now or later. A colleague speaks in a meeting, and you choose whether to support the point, challenge it, or remain silent. A friend disappoints you, and you decide whether to address it directly, wait for a better moment, or quietly store the bruise away. A spouse walks in tired, and you sense that the evening could become either softer or sharper, depending on one small response. These moments feel personal because they are personal. Yet they are also strategic, not manipulative in the crude sense, but shaped by expectation. You are reading the other person, and the other person is reading you. Every choice sends information about patience, confidence, vulnerability, standards, and intent. Even apologies contain game theory. Apologize too quickly, and someone may suspect you only want to end discomfort. Wait too long, and hurt may harden into distance. Speak gently, and the door may open. Defend yourself too fiercely, and repair may become harder. The same is true of boundaries. Say yes too often, and people may build their expectations on your availability. Say no too harshly, and cooperation may cool. A good boundary is not just refusal. It is a signal that helps others understand the pattern by which you can be trusted. Friendship has games of reciprocity. Parenting has games of consistency. Offices have games of credit, deference, ambition, and alliance. Social media has games of status, performance, and attention, where even silence can be interpreted as a move. There is a kind of relief in seeing this clearly. We stop being surprised that trust takes time, that mixed signals create confusion, that generosity can invite warmth, but also opportunism. That conflict often grows from clashing expectations rather than obvious malice. The world becomes less random once we notice the patterns. And yet, game theory should not make us suspicious of everyone. Its gentler lesson is that awareness can make us wiser. If actions teach others what to expect, then we can become more deliberate about the futures we are quietly building. If repeated interactions shape trust, then small acts matter more than they seem. Most of life is not decided in dramatic moments. It is decided in tiny, repeated ones, whether to answer kindly, whether to keep a promise, whether to compete when cooperation would do, whether to hold firm without cruelty, whether to make a move that leaves tomorrow a little easier to live in. These are the hidden games we all play, and often, without knowing it, they become the hidden architecture of who we are to one another. And so, we arrive at the quiet edge of the subject. Game theory began tonight with a simple thought, that our choices are rarely ours alone. From there, it opened outward into marriage and parenting, sports and business, war and diplomacy, traffic, fairness, and shared resources. Human beings are always adjusting to one another. We watch, guess, signal, protect, hesitate, cooperate, retaliate, forgive, and try again. Some of these patterns are beautiful. Trust built slowly between two people. A team learning to move as one. Neighbors caring for what none of them owns alone. Parents teaching children that the world can be both structured and safe. Other patterns are darker. Fear can trap people into arms races, price wars, silent resentment, or mutual suspicion. Pride can turn apology into delay. Mistrust can push rational minds toward outcomes no one wanted. The same intelligence that allows cooperation can also sharpen rivalry. That is part of what makes game theory so human. It does not describe life as a neat machine. It describes life as a field of interdependence, where outcomes emerge from many minds meeting imperfectly. No one sees the whole board. No one controls every response. Perhaps that is why the deepest lesson here is not really about winning. In ordinary life, the best move is often not the one that dominates the moment, but the one that preserves the future. The wise move may be the one that protects trust, leaves room for dignity, and makes cooperation easier next time. To understand strategy, then, is not to become cold. It is to notice what kind of patterns we create around us. Do we make others feel that honesty is safe? Do we teach those close to us that boundaries are real and kindness is real too? Do we push every interaction toward competition, or can we recognize when a gentler equilibrium is possible? Every day, in ways large and small, we help write the games other people believe they are in. A sharp voice can turn a home defensive. A fair rule can steady it. A broken promise can alter a friendship for months. A kept promise can make the world feel less uncertain. So, as this evening softens, perhaps the final thought is a simple one. Life is not only about making the right move, it is also about helping create the kind of game in which good moves are possible, a marriage where repair can happen, a family where trust has memory, a workplace where fairness still matters. The world slows, and so do we. There is comfort in remembering that beneath so much confusion lies pattern, and beneath so much rivalry lies the enduring possibility of coordination, trust, and quiet wisdom. Let the board grow still now. Let the voices recede, the calculations soften, the signals dim into distance. There is nothing left to solve tonight. Only rest and the calm knowledge that even in a world of strategy, gentleness remains one of the most powerful moves. Good night.